it going? Let's go. This is the CWU Student Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Bazette. You already know what it is. It's the place where the various student media outlets come together and we discuss current and upcoming content. We got Sam from Pulse in the house today. We got Rachel from The Observer, and we got Tamara from Newswatch. Three awesome student journalists that are just going to tell us what's going on. We're going to discuss a little bit about some of the stories that Sam has written in the last year or so. And then Rachel's going to talk to us about what it's like to be a non-journalism major working in the student media, which is happening more and more. So it's a valuable perspective that she's going to share with us. And then Tamara's going to join us as well to talk about a little bit about the new president that we are learning more and more about as each day goes by. So it's just time to do it, baby. Let's just get into it. Here we go. CWU Student Media Podcast. All right, joining me now, we have Samantha Cabeza. Thank you for being here, Samantha. I really appreciate it. She is here from Pulse, and I understand you're a photographer this quarter, but you've written in the past. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it is my first quarter doing Pulse as a photographer, but previous quarters, so probably the past 4 already, I've been a writer.
Yeah, and so you've written a couple things that I think we should talk about today. The 824 story, should we start with that? That was, I know it's, well, that has to have been about 6-7 months, 8 months almost now, but
yeah. It is crazy to think that already. I wrote that back for our summer issue. It was around the time when the Black Lives Matter protests and the incident with George Floyd happened. So which is already almost a year ago, which is crazy.
Yeah, I can't believe how time is functioning in this season of America, as they're saying.
Yeah, it's definitely it was definitely a really interesting story to write. I've never written anything like that, especially during a pandemic and like probably the largest civil rights movement. But honestly, it was really humbling to write it in a way. I got to interview a lot of interesting people who were at the protests. One of the people I interviewed was actually tear gassed, which was crazy. She told me her story about how it happened and like how she stood in front of somebody to protect them. And I got to go like in depth about not only just like the protest, but also like how the pandemic has been affecting or was affecting the protests and like low income Black communities and how they haven't like been supported in the best way. And it was just really interesting to write, and I was really excited to write it.
So when these people that you're talking about interviewing, were they at the Seattle protest, the Portland protest, or just like the local Ellensburg protest? Not to diminish the impact that those had, but where were these guys attending the protests at?
They were at the Seattle one. I don't know if you remember the night where the cop car was caught on fire.
Yeah.
All over the news. And one of the people who I interviewed, her name was Kayla. She witnessed that firsthand, and just like the raw emotion behind it, and it was really impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. This had to have been, I don't want to get this wrong, it might have been June or July, when the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was still under operation. I just went and stopped on my way through. I was doing my best to not be in large crowds at the time because I had family members that were high risk, and but I really wanted to see the autonomous zone because I was just like, this, I just don't feel like this is getting the coverage that it deserves, because this is like, this kind of thing doesn't happen all the time. You're talking about like an independent zone that is claiming to be outside of the governance of the rest of the United States. Like that's history. So I went and I stopped there, and I know a lot of people had different takes on what it was. I won't necessarily share mine, but because it's not really opinions are all over the board. But it was really insane to see, because it's just like, this is an area that has been kind of cut off from the rest of the world, and a bunch of people have just kind of decided, we're going to have this area where we call the shots. And I just thought that was like, that's such an insane part of history. I'm glad that I got to see it while I was still there, even though I wasn't around a lot of the protests and stuff at the time, again, because I had high risk family members. And it was at such strange timing that all this social justice stuff was going on during also a time that people were in so much danger, like medically speaking. Anyway, but yeah, that whole this Seattle, and living in a state like Washington or even Oregon, where you have these cities that tend to be the forefront of social movements. We've seen a lot of this, like in the last decade or so, and in 2020 really stands out. But like starting in 2014 was Ferguson, I believe, and like between then and now, like I know a handful of people that have been tear gassed. I know a handful of people that have like, you know, that have seen this isn't even a new thing to them. Like,
Yeah.
been doing this for a while, and you know, it's wild to think that this is almost just becoming a part of American life.
Yeah. I actually interviewed this guy very briefly. He didn't make it into the story because there wasn't enough content, but he went to I think the Washington D.C. protest, and he actually lost his eye.
Mm-hmm. I know
But
exactly who you're talking about.
yeah, I got to talk to him, and it
Really?
was it was really insane. I was so thankful that he actually even replied, but it is scary to think that like this is like, because I remember I was 14 years old when Ferguson happened, and now I'm 21, and like that's a quite a big age jump, and it feels like Ferguson was yesterday, and now we're just still in this situation, and it's I can't imagine how like emotionally draining it is for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, Ferguson doesn't seem that long ago, but
Mhm.
it's going to be 7 years. I'm trying to remember what month exactly it happened, but we're going on 7 years ago. And that at the time, that seemed like that was like, I've never seen something like this before. Now we're like, you know, how many of these things are going to happen before we see actual change, things like that. And how many times are we going to have to, like, have this massive historical movement before, the point is across. And, that guy that you're talking about, I've seen he's become very active on Twitter and things like that. The guy who lost his eye, and that wasn't even, I believe that wasn't even like his first protest, kind of as I was saying. Like, it's kind of like how there's a group of people in the 60s that they started referring to them as a generation of protest kids. Like, they'll say, you listen to like old Velvet Underground songs or whatever, and they'll be like, hey, all you protest kids. And there's a whole generation of people that were just protest kids. And I really think that this is another generation of that. Like, we're going to have another generation of protest kids who, they spent their, late teens, early 20s, like constantly protesting, just like those guys in the 60s. I could definitely see this generation being, labeled exactly the same way, which, is not good, because when we're having that many protests, that means there's some serious systemic issues that need to be addressed. And you have a guy out here who, lost his eye. You have other people who are killed. It is insane to think, when are these things going to be addressed? When are we going to have to stop doing this?
Yeah. And then which also makes me think like with what happened in the Capitol a few weeks ago, like I can't imagine if the roles were reversed in that situation, where if it was like a different group of people rather than the people that showed up, like how would that have gone? I mean, only one person died that I know of, and then a lot of people were also really injured and not injured, arrested, but like not all of them faced the consequences that I feel like a different group of people would have faced, which really makes me think.
No, I think that was like a lot of people, when they saw that was the first thing on their mind. Like, you've got to be kidding me right now. Like, look at what some of these guys are able to do. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's bonkers that anybody was able to like storm the Capitol building while there's like there were people in session. I didn't think that was something you could do. Like, I didn't think, I guess I would have thought if you had a mob that was swarming the Capitol building, there would have been, it would have been a lot uglier.
Yeah,
But
I think so too.
and I can't help but think that after the events that took place this summer, they're probably one of the reasons they had the privilege to be able to do that is because so many cops were probably like, I don't want to do anything because I've seen 6+ months now of what happens, and it's almost as if the events that happened this summer actually made it easier for those guys to do what they did involving the insurrection. And that hasn't been addressed at all. It's like, there's an extra layer of privilege there because you were able to do something simply because there's been like 6 months of coverage on police brutality and killings and things like that, that now they don't want to even defend. They don't even want to do their job against you guys now because they've had this, and I'm not fighting for either side either way. I just think it's interesting that I think that did play a part.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And a lot of people were really hoping that like news channels and things like that would call it what it was, which was essentially in a way like a terrorist check. But like no one would call that. No one's gonna call it what it is, which really sucks because if it was like people of color who stormed, like that would be the first word that they used.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because, as somebody who is a trained journalist, like I watch the main news channels every day break the rules that I was taught. And I was taught these like in the last 3 years or so. So it's like, you already know that the media doesn't follow the rules that they're supposed to, as far as sharing their opinions, uh, constantly, not even trying to hide their biases. Like it's absolutely insane how biased the media has gotten and there's different outlets that represent different sides. It's not just one way, but there are certain things when it comes to this. It's like, oh, so now you guys won't share what it's. I just feel like the opinion that they are willing to share is always, even the opinion that they're willing to show the public is biased, even though they're not really supposed to show opinion at all. Like true journalism, if you shouldn't know what that journalist's political stance is, but it's just funny that I think, there are certain situations like this where it's like, okay, so now you're not going to say what it was, but typically the media has become not shy in sharing their opinion at all. It says a lot.
Yeah, no,
I'm not saying this the way I want to say it, because I know this is a podcast that a lot of people watch, and I'm trying to like be careful with my words, but
no, I completely get it. And I'm a journalism student too. And some of the first things that we're taught in every class, like I've been at Central for 2 years now, because I transferred, but every class I've taken that's journalism or comm related, like we've been taught like opinion is not shared in journalism. Like you cannot share your personal opinion, and sometimes when you turn on the news, like it just feels like that's all that it is.
yeah.
Like it feels like opinion is just kind of like become the new norm in journalism, but in school we're being taught a completely different thing.
Yeah, it's sad. I literally said this exact thing last week, but it's sad when you go to class and the example that they use to teach you what not to do is one of the most famous journalists in America. Like,
Mhm.
one of my professors specifically used Anderson Cooper as an example of what not to do, or specifically uses Tucker Carlson or one of these, whether you want to call them journalists or political pundits or whatever you want to call them. Uh, there's the opinion section has just been weaved into the daily broadcasts, or print's a little different, but
Yeah.
it is just sad when the main journalists that we know of and can name off the top of our heads are the examples we're teaching our students. Like, don't do what they're doing, even though they're the most famous journalists in America. Like, that's pathetic, man.
Yeah, and it's from both sides. Like both sides are definitely guilty parties. And like I've seen some. I mean, I don't want to say like both sides, but there are two sides, which is really sad to think that. But both of them are definitely guilty of bringing in this opinionated story, and it's not labeled either. Like when you turn on the news and they start sharing their opinion, like there's no big title that says this is my opinion.
Yeah.
But like when you look at the Observer, which is like the student run newspaper, it says in bold words like this is an opinion.
Opinion section. Yeah, there's a section for that.
Yeah, but it just feels like in like everyday like live news channel journalism, it's not labeled. So people don't know that their own opinion. They think that it's the actual news.
Yeah, and it comes down to a term that I learned from, shout out to Jennifer Green, media literacy. So many people are media illiterate, and that's not to talk down on anybody. It's just that, like, I wouldn't even consider myself media literate before I took a college level course on how to be media literate, and the average American is not media literate. So that's why it's so easy to do these things, and that's why people don't want to call it out when it's on their side. So say you're a right-leaning person, you love to call out CNN and MSNBC, but you won't call it out when Fox News does it. And say you're a left-leaning person, you love to trash on Fox News, but when you see, MSNBC doing it and you agree with the opinion, they're less likely to call it out. But the truth is, we have to call it out on both sides. It's kind of disgusting that we have journalists that are doing this, because especially look at how much of a mess 2020 was. That is not the time for anything but objectivity from the news. And anyway, we've taken a lot of time to talk about this. I just also want to ask you about that story you did, that interview with Jasmine Washington, if you have a second to talk about that.
Yeah, I did it on period poverty, which I think is honestly so important, especially now in this day and age when a lot of people are suffering from losing their job, or they haven't gotten a stimulus check, or just things like that. And like a lot of women and like people who get their period like are really struggling to afford menstrual products, especially college students. Like Jasmine used to say she would have to buy her products from the dollar store because it was just too expensive to buy it from Fred Meyer, or and a lot of Washington thankfully got rid of the pink tax, but a lot of menstrual products, or even just products that are colored pink and for women, were taxed because of just the color of it, which is so.
Just sorry to interrupt, but for the reference of anybody who isn't aware, Jasmine Washington was the former ASCWU president. So she was the president of the student body at Central. I just wanted to clear that up.
That's okay. Sorry that I didn't, but
no, you're good. No worries.
It was so, like, honestly, it was such a special story for me to write, especially as a woman. And just I interviewed Bleed the North, which is a Canadian-based period poverty like awareness group, and just another podcast called Clitorally the Best. I interviewed as well, and that was so fun, like getting so many different opinions, and like especially from so many different areas. Like, and then Ella Daesh from the UK, like I interviewed her, and they're struggling with the period tax, and it's just like it was a lot of different opinions from so many different regions. And I think it's such an important topic to talk about, because not everybody knows that menstrual products the prices are inflated, but this is something that women can't necessarily control. So
absolutely. And yeah, I remember when Jasmine was running, which that must have been 2019 when she ran. I was obviously still in class sessions at this time. That's how I think of things now, before I had to wear a mask everywhere and after I had to wear a mask everywhere.
Yeah.
But so this was a while back, but when she was campaigning, I remember that being a big part of her platform, is like, look, there should be free menstrual products on campus everywhere for the women of this campus. And I just remember thinking, she's going to win, because that's like nothing's going to beat that. That's a great platform to have, no matter what, everything else she was running on. She had a lot of other ideas and good ideas, but that was the one that I was like, that's fantastic. And that's what's going to win her the student election. And it did. And yeah, that was a really great thing. And it's something that needs to be addressed all across the nation, not just on our campus, but nationwide. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. A lot of people are even pushing for period products to be free, which honestly would be amazing. And I think it would be such a huge jump. And a lot of students also suffer from endometriosis, and Jasmine actually suffered from that as well. And that could put you in bed for days. Like that's not an easy thing to go through. And like the fact that people have to skip school because of their period, or they're just in so much pain that they have to miss out on things and not go to work, and then not working means not getting paid, and not getting paid means you can't a Ford period product.
It's a snowball effect, if you would.
Yeah, exactly.
And this was also, I believe, Jasmine was already the president at this time, but the Cirque, there was a lawsuit against the dining hall because they made it so like menstrual cramps and things like that were no longer a reason you could call out for work, and it caused this massive lawsuit. And that was, I think, I'm like 99% sure Jasmine was the president while this was happening. So that was like, if there is such a thing, good timing for that to happen, because we had a president who that was actually like one of her like platform like ideas. And so I remember on this podcast I interviewed I think it was Nick Tucker. Yeah, I interviewed Nick Tucker from The Observer when we first started this podcast on that topic. And yeah, and it was huge. It was everywhere, and people were like, "That's ridiculous," and it ended up in a massive lawsuit that, you know, because that's ridiculous that you can't call out of work for that. It's a medical, you know,
It's a real thing. Yeah.
I don't have to say it. Like, people know, people are already on. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but
yeah.
I hate to cut you short, but we're running a little low on time. Is there anything you want to touch on before we cut this off?
No, I think I'm good. We honestly went really into depth.
I know I didn't fully expect that, but that was awesome. And you've done some great work at Pulse. I really look forward to seeing what you put out in the future. And thank you for being here. I know it was somewhat short notice, so I really appreciate it.
It was perfect. Thank you for having me.
Hey, no problem. I hope to have you back on in the future. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. All righty. Cool. I am here with Rachel Degnan, a senior reporter at The Observer. Rachel, I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me, Jared. I appreciate it.
No problem. So an interesting thing that I found out is that you are not a journalism major. You just like doing this, which I think is awesome. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm actually a double major in psychology and public relations. And my public relations degree offered the class for credit of The Observer. So I started it last quarter, and I really got into it and enjoyed it and had a lot of fun. Writing in general, I've always enjoyed writing, but it was always like academic writing, and it was fun to like have a different take and to be writing actual stories that people read, and I could interview people and get to know people. So for me, it was like a nice change of pace where I was still getting credit for my major, but I was trying something else. And yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then I applied for senior writer for this quarter, and I write for The Scene currently. And yeah, I really enjoy it. It's so much fun, and I suggest it to anybody that wants to try.
It's kind of a bug, isn't it? Like, it's like you catch the bug.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many artsy things that have a bug with it. You know, you start theater and then you fall in love with theater or art.
Yeah.
And it just takes it takes dipping your foot in the water.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe like journalism as art, because I've done that before, and people are like, this is not art, this is a science. And I'm like, I don't subscribe to that dichotomy. I think it's both. I think it can be both. And sometimes it's often both at the same time.
I think that everything in life is artistic in its own way, and you have to find the way to get creative. And I think anything creative is artistic. So I think anything that anybody is passionate about is art, and I think everything can be passionate about. So
that was the tea. I appreciate that, everything about that. And yeah, it's what was like when you first started. I liked how you said it's different from like academic writing, because I started doing this because people were like, oh, you know, you enjoy writing, you're good at writing, why don't you give journalism a crack? And it's not the same. It's like you have to abandon like everything you know about trying to make things sound good, because that's not what they want. Like, what was your experience with trying to, you know, kind of shed these ideas of trying to make a sentence sound good and just like more get to the point in a way that sounds good? You know what I mean?
I do. When I was younger, my brother, he's 5 years older than me, he started writing this story and he'd get really into it. And I wanted to write a story like him. So I would sit down and I would write in the most elaborate and fancy way I could. Like the first 3 sentences would be the most detailed sentences. And then I'd never finish writing the story, right? So coming into these stories and these articles, I have this tendency to start it with like the most punny title or like the most interesting thing. And it takes away, like, my leads sometimes come out amazing and other times they just are, the lead leads you this way instead of the right way where the rest of my article comes from. So for me, it's been really interesting to have to sit back and be like, okay, here's my time to be super creative. Like, I did an aviation story and got to start the story with a very descriptive, what it was like flying in the air. And I loved writing that. And then other times I have to write an article that's just, the lead is more upfront. Like, this is what's going on. Here it is, flat out. Like, no sugarcoating it. And now you know what my entire story is about. So changing my pace from more creative writing to newsworthy writing is very interesting. And at the same time, you can still incorporate them, which I do enjoy. But I find myself a lot of times being like, I'm stretching with this. Like, this is too imaginative for a news story about the Cirque or something.
Yeah, no, and it's I think it's a healthy way to look at it when you think of yourself as more of a conduit for the story, and the story's already in there. You're just the one who has the hand to write it, you know, and like that's when it's more of an art, like you said, is like, okay, I am as a writer just a conduit for information, and sure, you have the ability to decide how it's going to sound when it comes out. But I don't know. That's always the way I looked at it, whether it was, I did more broadcast stuff, but it was more like, I saw myself as like, okay, have information, needs to be out. I have to view myself as more of a conduit than like the guy who's, you know, crafting the information. I'm not. The information's already there. I just have to make sure people see it or
and
hear
are
it or read it.
interested.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, the fact that you're not a journalism major, I think it's good that you're promoting that. Like, one of the, you know, Maddie Wilson, who's been on this podcast a couple times from Pulse, you know, she's you know, she was going to school to be a social worker, and then she ended up running Pulse for like a year or more. Like, she was like the best ever. Like, she did an awesome job, and she wasn't even a journalism major, and she just turned out to be an amazing writer and a great leader as well. So, you know, it doesn't always have to be somebody who wants to do this professionally. A lot of times it just has to be the person who views themselves as that conduit for information.
Yeah, and someone willing to learn. I mean, it's really easy to learn how to write for news, for the Observer, for Pulse, for any of these. You just have to take some time, take practice. And I honestly have recommended, I think it's the only class I've recommended to as many people as possible because it's worth it. There are some life skills there. And also just learning what it is to put news out there. I feel like we forget, especially in our world today, how hard it is to write a news article without, you know, having all of the things you need, without having biasness in it, getting it out to the public, getting it out on time. Like, newspaper is printed on, you know, it's out on Sundays. So if the news happened on the previous Monday, it's boring at this point. Like, nobody cares. So like, getting that news out there, staying relevant, it's a lot harder than it seems. I've definitely gained lots of respect for the news industry after this. And I mean, that's something I'll take forever. Like, I'll always use that.
Yeah, it's definitely a job that you've got to work on your toes because things are always changing and shifting, and, you know, you've got to be ready for you've got to be able to adapt to new information, or, you know, this was going to be the leading story, but 3 hours later everything has changed and now it's at the bottom of the news cycle or whatever it is. And it's, you know, it's a high stress work environment, but it also teaches you a lot of lessons. The hardest thing I ever had to teach myself how to do was to make a deadline, because I was the kind of guy who would be like, oh, it's 11:59. I'm just going to email my professor and give them like a dissertation on why they should give me an extension, even though I'm waiting till 11:59 to tell them, because I don't think they understand that I'm writing like a gift to humanity in this essay right now. And if they just give me like 3 more hours, it'll be that gift to humanity. But if I have to turn it, and I would just give all these reasons that they should let me. You don't get to do that in journalism. You don't get to do that. You have to have it out because it's going out to the people. And that was the most valuable lesson I learned, is, you know, how to make a deadline. That's something it's very difficult to do.
Yeah. I learned a lot of like following a story, right? You get this idea. So like, my first article was about the rec center and how they were opening up during COVID. So I got this idea and they were like, okay, go interview this person, this person, this person. I was like, all right, sounds great. So I go and interview the first guy and the direction of my questions was like, so I'm gonna go this way, right? The article, I swear, went the exact opposite of where I was going with it. And that's just because of the interviews. Like, you have to be so flexible.
Yep.
Because it depends. Like, I've wanted so many times. I'm just sitting there in the back of my head. I'm like, please say this while I'm interviewing you so I can quote you for this. Please say this when I'm interviewing you. Please. And then they completely change it. And you're like, well, that's where we have to go. Like, sometimes the article's boring because that's where it went.
Yeah. No. Well, the other thing too is that for the print side of things, you can only have so large of a quote. And for the broadcast side of things, you're not supposed to have what we call an SOT, which is like sound on tape, which is just like kind of an outdated term. But it's like when they cut away from the news reporter talking and then you just see whoever the interviewee saying something for a few seconds. There's literally specific rules. You can't go, the max you can go is 20 seconds. So if you have an amazing clip of somebody talking, but it's 23 seconds long, you simply can't use it, or you're really not supposed to. And then people get really mad and they're like, oh, well, you just butchered this clip of me talking. Dude, this is a 2-minute news package. We can't spend the whole minute and 30 seconds of your whole quote, no matter how good it was. So then, like you said, you said earlier that you have gained a little bit of respect for the news industry. I don't think people realize when they're being interviewed a lot of times, if you want to say something, you've got to do it in 20 seconds or less. Or if you're getting interviewed for print, you've got to say it in a quotable way, or else that's not going to get in there because it's just not efficient to read, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, or you have to put all the parentheses what they meant to say, or this is the word that's proper grammar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you just butchered their quote and it's why did I even use this? This is basically just what I wanted them to say. And that's one of the most tempting parts of it is not asking completely loaded questions to get the answer that you want, because it's so tempting to do, but that's not journalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are you working on right now? We're getting a little low on time, but I want to talk about what we can expect to see from you in the next week or so.
So the article that'll be out on Tuesday is about virtual commencement and student reactions to that. So there's an interview from the provost in why they chose to go virtual. And then I talked to 3 different students about their opinions and how they're going to still celebrate, because it is still a milestone. It is still a big deal. And just because it's online and people can't walk doesn't mean it has to be any less of a celebration. So after the announcement was put out on Facebook, I'd been scrolling through and just seeing a lot of negativity and some positivity in there, but a lot of people seem to be very upset by it. And I personally was supposed to walk during commencement this year, so I kind of felt with that. And when I was doing the article, hearing the story, it's hearing these 3 people and talking to them and their reactions, it just became a positive article too. So I'm kind of excited for people, because I think it takes something that is sad and isn't good and is here, in the end, it's still a milestone. It's still a big deal. You still did all this work. You're still getting these degrees. You can still celebrate. This is sad, yes, but it doesn't mean in 6 years, are you even going to remember?
Yeah, no, it was kind of weird for me personally. I went through this last year because I was actually supposed to graduate class of 2020, but then I took some time off when COVID hit, thinking I'll just go back when it gets back to normal. But here we are.
Yep.
Anyway, so that's why I'm still doing this at Central. So then I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just be part of the class of 2021 and walk then. But it's not going to happen either. And a lot of the people that graduated last year were told, well, if you want to come back and walk next year, that's fine. Well, that's not going to be able to happen either. Yep. So I can understand why a lot of people are really bummed. But at the end of the day, man, the commencement was going to cost you money, and there's traveling fees and things like that. The people I do feel bad for are, it's a big weekend for Ellensburg. Ellensburg businesses in general just really benefit from it. So that does suck. And as much as they're already suffering now, I feel bad for them. But for the people that are upset that they're not going to get to walk, I feel for you. That's how I felt last year. And I even held out some hope that maybe this year. But at the end of the day, man, you didn't do this for 4 or 5 years just to walk, on a stage with, 2,000 other people within the same hour of you or whatever it is. And, you did this, to take that next step into your life. You're still going to be able to do that. you shouldn't sell yourself short, and it's not going to feel any less real to you in, like you said, in 6 years, in 10 years that you graduated college, and it does suck. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't suck for those people. I feel for them, but yeah, this is still a massive achievement. I agree with everything you're saying here.
Yeah. So I'm excited for it. I hope people will read it. I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, it'll be one of my bigger articles. But each day, that's the fun part about writing, is you never know how people are going to take it, and you try to improve in every single article. And yeah,
no, I covered so many important things when I was at Newswatch, and the number one story I ever had as far as popularity was about a parrot's birthday at the pet store. So like, you never know what it's going to be. And that was the best story I ever did. I'll say it. So, well, hey, Rachel, I think we're getting kind of short on time, but thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You're doing great work. And I love the words that you said about inspiring people to go out and, work for the paper, work for whoever, even if they're not necessarily in the journalism program. We've had some really great writers and really great people in the student media that weren't journalism majors. So, it's definitely possible, and it's more than possible. It's like, it's just who you are. It doesn't have to be your major, it's whether or not you're going to be committed to sharing the news. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And you're welcome on anytime.
Thank you, Jared.
All right. Tamara Sevao joins us once again. Thank you, Tamara. I appreciate you being here.
Of course.
So what can you tell us about this new president that we've got? Well, I guess he's like the incoming president, right? He's not our current president quite yet.
Correct. Yeah. So he starts June, but from what I understand, they want him to start earlier. He is in Iowa right now at Northern Iowa University. So he's trying to finish off his seniors there and then come here. But yeah, I sat in on his press conference and a couple other announcements that he did to the students and staff. And he just seems like so well-spoken, he's really aiming to connect with students. So I'm excited to see what he does there when he comes to Central.
Yeah, no, it seemed like everyone who said they attended that press conference was like, they kind of had the same thoughts. They said he seems very student oriented. And are there any, do you think there's any concerns or anything that you see? I mean, I know it's really hard to determine anything like that yet, but do you have anything that you're wondering about yet, or is it too early to call anything like that?
Honestly, I don't. I think he kind of covered everyone's questions. So as they come up, maybe concerns will come up within students and stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm really excited for him to start. I think we definitely need a president who is willing to connect with the students one-on-one. He was even saying, so his whole name is James Walport, but he was even saying it's so important for me to be called Jim.
Mm-hmm.
If you see me, I don't want to be called president or anything like that. So just him saying that made him sound really relatable to us.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool that he wants to go over that. I always liked it when professors would do that, because it's so hard to remember. Sometimes you'll call somebody professor and they're like, well, I'm not actually a professor because I don't have a master's, or I don't know what it's just really hard to know what someone's official title is. So it is nice that he's just like, dude, just call me Jim, because, he's a pretty prestigious dude. But, so why did you say that they want him to start a little earlier? Do you know why that is?
Honestly, I'm not too sure, but I just know he wants to send his seniors off after graduation and then come here. I think he's visited. So he said he had an interview in Seattle, an in-person interview in Seattle for the president position. And then he went out of his way. I mean, not out of his way, but he decided to drive to Ellensburg just to get the feel of campus and the town. And that wasn't even required. So that's just something that he thought was really important to do. So yeah, I'm not that kind of straight off, but I'm not exactly sure why they want him to start early. But yeah, I know he was saying he has some pretty big shoes to fill and whatnot. He grew up in a small town, so he's excited to be back in that kind of small town environment. So
yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad he did that. I think that is important, that he took that time to come and see the town, and it is good that he's from a small town, because small towns just do not operate the same way that a city college would, or a city university, the University of Washington, or even Whitworth or Gonzaga that are in Spokane. It's probably good that he took the time to come and see for himself. And also it's good that he had the experience of being in a small town. I would say.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it just kind of sounds like everything's going well so far, I would say, with the introduction to the new leadership that we're going to have.
Yeah, for sure. And he got asked questions about, how are you going to go about diversity coming out of the whole BLM movement and whatnot. It's a huge time to transition into a position like that. And he answered it really professionally and really well. He's done work at the college that he's at to really aim for diversity and whatnot. And he made it a big deal. Like, if you come on campus, like, you need to be accepted for who you are and whatnot. So it was really cool to hear that from someone who's going to be leading us.
Absolutely. I think it was Mitchell who told me, Mitchell Rowland from the Observer, that told me that his former university was like 90, or I don't want to butcher the number, but it was like 80 to 90% white. And he's coming to Central, who like regularly campaigns that they're a very diverse school and like the most diverse school in Washington, most diverse university in Washington State, I should say. So, I mean, that is a big thing to address. Like, it's, did you say he's from Northern Iowa?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I would imagine that like Northern Iowa is not going to be quite the same, like, diversity wise as like Washington State. But so that's a big thing that I'm glad they're addressing. And I'm glad he's not like afraid to talk about it, because a lot of people want to like shy away from that topic, but it's important. And I'm glad that he's not shying away from it.
Yeah. He's been answering everyone's questions, openly and honestly, and you could just tell it's his true intention. So I'm excited.
That's good. Well, I look forward to hearing about how this goes in the future. And feel free to come on anytime if you have more updates on how it's going with him, or just how, President Gaudino also transitioning to the comm department, how that's going, because that's going to be very interesting. I'd be a little nervous to have him as my professor.
I know, like, we're in the comm department. Like, imagine just like, I mean, I'm graduating this spring, but like, I can't even imagine coming back next fall quarter and having him as my teacher. It'd be so weird.
Yeah, dude. If I was taking like, I think he said he was probably going to teach some like intro comm classes or something to start out, because he's already tenured in the department. So like, it would be insane to have like introduction to communication with like the former president of the school. That's like wild. And that's really intimidating. Like, I mean, just having an intro class with a former president, that's a lot.
I know, because we've since we've been there, we've seen him and known him as the president. So it's crazy. Yeah,
one time I saw, this is completely off topic, but one time I saw him driving down University Way with one of those yellow tickets on his windshield. That was the funniest thing I've ever seen, I think, my entire time at campus. Because it was
so
like,
relatable though.
I know, it's like, dude, every one of us is affected by the parking crisis at Central. Hopefully the new president will address the parking situation, because it's outrageous.
I know. I wonder how that's working with like a lot of people being online.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's not so much of a problem right now, but it seemed like the year leading up to COVID, that was like the number one thing people were talking about, was how bad the parking situation is. So I'd like to see how this new guy addresses that. I wonder if anybody has asked him that question yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, anyway, Tamara, I think that's about everything that we know for this new guy, unless you have anything to add.
For the president, nope. That's all.
Well, if anything changes, let me know, and because the people are dying to know. The people of Central, the viewers of the Student Media podcast, the many thousands of them are dying to know. But
the many thousands of them.
I can dream. A man can only dream. But thank you, Tamara, for coming on. I really appreciate it. As always, you're welcome here anytime if you have any new information to bless us with.
Sweet. I know we have some like pretty exciting stories coming up this week, so next week's podcast should be interesting.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of new changes coming to the Student Media podcast, and I'll let you know about all of that once we're done recording here. But anyway, okay. I think that's going to go ahead and conclude our Student Media podcast for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. A lot of big stuff coming up. Thank you, Tamara. Do you want to do a virtual high five? Because we used to always end the podcast that way, and I've been forgetting to do it.
Yes.
Okay, ready? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Boom. That was so cool. Everybody likes us for that.
I love it.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.